Hey everyone, in this section we will look at the short run Phillips curve and the long run Phillips curve. The short run Phillips curve concept was developed by A.W. Phillips and it shows an inverse relation between inflation rate and unemployment rate, holding constant the natural rate of unemployment and the expected inflation rate. Looking at this graphically, I have this two-quadrant graph with inflation rate on the vertical axis and unemployment rate on the horizontal axis. I can start with this anchor point B. At this point B, the expected inflation rate is 3% and the natural rate of unemployment is 6%. If I go from point B to point A, the inflation rate goes up, unemployment rate goes down. If I go from point B to point C, the unemployment rate is going up, the inflation rate is going down. Looking at the numbers here, I can conclude there is an inverse relation between inflation rate and unemployment rate. If I look at 1960s US economy, I can explain the inflation rate and unemployment rate data using this short-run Phillips curve concept. Now, I want to rhyme the aggregate supply curve and the short-run Phillips curve and look at how a movement along the aggregate supply curve is equivalent to a movement along the short-run Phillips curve. So let's just go and take a look at this graph here where I have aggregate supply curve or the short-run aggregate supply curve on the right and the short-run Phillips curve on the left. Look at the price index. The initial price index for 2009 is equal to 100. That is given to me. Let's start with anchor point B and I am looking at the aggregate supply curve graph on the right. At point B, the aggregate demand is intersecting the short-run aggregate supply curve and that is intersecting the long-run aggregate supply curve. The potential gross domestic product is $10 trillion and the price index is 103. Using the numbers 100 and 103, I will calculate the inflation rate. The inflation rate is new minus old CPI over old CPI times 100 and this is equal to 3%. The point B on the left is on the right is associated to point B on the left. Rather, point B on the right where we look at the short run aggregate supply curve is related to point B on the left where we look at the short run Phillips curve. The inflation rate is 3%, which is the expected inflation rate. The natural rate of unemployment at this point is 6%. This natural rate of unemployment is related to the potential gross domestic product, which is 10 trillions. Now, if we shift the aggregate demand curve to the right to point A, the price increases, or we can also say the CPI increases and the real gross domestic product also goes up. Look at point A here. The inflation rate is going up from 3%, which was the expected inflation rate, to 4%. And the GDP was increasing here. When GDP increases, unemployment rate decreases. Now, if we shift the aggregate demand from 81 to 83, the prices will go down, the GDP will also go down. This point C is associated to the point C on the left on the short run Phillips curve. So my inflation rate, if I compare points B and C, went down, and the unemployment rate went up at point C compared to point B. My take home or conclusion from this slide is, if I increase aggregate demand, the inflation rate will go up, unemployment rate will go down, and vice versa. If I have aggregate demand fluctuations, this will bring movements along the aggregate supply curve, and this is equivalent to movements along the short-run Phillips curve. So far, we looked at the short-run Phillips curve, and that was the Keynesian Phillips curve. Now, we are going to look at the long-run Phillips curve, which is a vertical straight line. And this shows there is no relation between inflation rate and unemployment rate. Or we can say there is no long-run trade-off between inflation rate and unemployment rate. So I can also say this long-run Phillips curve is associated with the long-run aggregate supply curve. The potential gross domestic product is associated with the natural rate of unemployment. Now take a look at this graph here. I have the short-run Phillips curve and the long-run Phillips curve. Each of them are intersecting each other. The natural rate of unemployment is 6%. And each short-run Phillips curve is associated with an expected rate of inflation. Whenever the short-run Phillips curve is intersecting the long-run Phillips curve, the actual inflation rate will be equal to the expected inflation rate. From the vertical axis, we can read the actual inflation rate and the expected inflation rate we will get from the short-run Phillips curve. At point A, the expected inflation rate is 3%. Now I'm going to increase the expected inflation rate from 3% to 7%. If the expected inflation rate increases, the short-run Phillips curve will shift upwards. And this is one of the reasons why the short-run Phillips curve is shifting to the right. Or we can say if the expected inflation rate goes down, the short-run Phillips curve will shift down. This explains what happened during 1970s in the US economy. We can look at 1973 to 75, where we had declining gross domestic product associated with increasing unemployment, as well as we had increasing inflation rate. So far we had the expected inflation rate constant when we were drawing the short-run Phillips curve. Now we just shifted the expected inflation rate. Okay. So this 6% is the natural rate of unemployment rate. What happens when the natural rate of unemployment rate goes up or goes down. In this example, the natural rate of unemployment went down from 6% to 4%. As a result, the long-run Phillips curve and the short-run Phillips curve both shifted to the left, but the expected inflation rate is constant. Okay, that is all here. Just try to remember there are two reasons why the short-run Phillips curve will shift. One is due to an increase or decrease of the expected inflation rate. If expected inflation rate increases, the short-run Phillips curve will shift up. If it decreases, short-run Phillips curve will shift down. Another reason is a change in the natural rate of unemployment. If the natural rate of unemployment goes down, the short-run Phillips curve will shift to the left, as well as the long-run Phillips curve, which will also shift to the left. That is all with the Phillips curve concept. Thank you very much. Hope this makes sense too.